The Dancing Plague of 1518, Madness, Music, and the Mystery of Strasbourg. The Enigma of the Dancing Plague. The year was 1518, and the city of Strasbourg, nestled in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, became the unlikely stage for one of the most bizarre and inexplicable events in history, the Dancing Plague. During the hot summer months, hundreds of people were inexplicably compelled to dance uncontrollably, sometimes to the point of exhaustion and death. This phenomenon, which spanned several weeks, baffled contemporaries and continues to puzzle modern historians and scientists. The Dancing Plague, also known as choreomania or St. Vitus's dance, was not an isolated incident. Similar outbreaks had occurred sporadically in Europe since the Middle Ages, but none matched the scale and intensity of the 1518 event in Strasbourg. Reports from the time describe scenes of men, women, and even children dancing wildly in the streets, often with expressions of distress and pain etched on their faces. The dancers seemed oblivious to their surroundings and incapable of stopping, driven by an irresistible force that propelled their bodies into continuous motion. To understand this enigmatic event, one must delve into the social, cultural, and medical context of the time. The early 16th century was a period of great turmoil and transition in Europe. The Reformation was challenging the authority of the Catholic Church, and Strasbourg itself was a city in religious and political flux. Amidst this backdrop of uncertainty and change, the sudden eruption of the Dancing Plague can be seen as a manifestation of the anxieties and stresses of the age. Contemporary accounts offer a vivid picture of the outbreak. The first known dancer was Frau Troffea, who began her compulsive jig on July 14, 1518. Within days, dozens more had joined her, and within a month, the number of dancers had swelled to over 400. Physicians, clergy, and local officials were at a loss to explain the cause of this strange affliction. Various theories were proposed, ranging from divine punishment and demonic possession to natural causes such as overheated blood or poisoned air. One of the most striking aspects of the Dancing Plague was the response of the authorities. Instead of trying to halt the dancing, they initially encouraged it, hoping that allowing the dancers to continue would help them overcome whatever was ailing them. Musicians were even hired to play for the dancers, and special stages were constructed. This approach, however, seemed only to exacerbate the situation, leading to more cases of exhaustion and death. Modern scholars have revisited the Dancing Plague with a range of interdisciplinary approaches. Psychological theories suggest mass hysteria or stress-induced psychogenic illness as possible explanations. Sociological analyses point to the social and economic pressures faced by the population of Strasbourg, including famine, disease, and the pervasive fear of divine retribution. Additionally, the role of ergotism, caused by the consumption of rye contaminated with ergot fungus, has been considered, as it can produce symptoms such as hallucinations and spasms. The Dancing Plague of 1518 remains a potent symbol of the mysterious and often inexplicable nature of human behavior. It challenges our understanding of the mind-body connection and highlights the profound impact that cultural and environmental factors can have on health and behavior. By studying this bizarre historical event, we gain insights not only into the specific conditions of early 16th century Europe, but also into the broader themes of collective behavior, social stress, and the limits of medical and scientific knowledge. As we embark on this journey through the streets of Strasbourg and the annals of history, we will explore the myriad facets of the Dancing Plague. From the initial outbreak and its rapid spread to the various interpretations and responses it elicited, we will piece together the puzzle of one of history's most intriguing epidemics. In doing so, we aim to shed light on the complex interplay of factors that can give rise to such extraordinary occurrences and to draw lessons that resonate with our understanding of human nature and society today. Chapter 1. The historical context of Strasbourg in 1518. To comprehend the full impact of the Dancing Plague, it is essential to understand the historical and social context of Strasbourg in 1518. Situated along the Rhine River, Strasbourg was a significant urban center in the Holy Roman Empire. It was a city characterized by its strategic location, commercial prosperity, and a vibrant cultural life. However, it was also a place of considerable tension and conflict, shaped by political, religious, and social upheavals. During the early 16th century, Strasbourg was transitioning from medieval traditions to the early modern period. This era was marked by the gradual decline of feudalism, the rise of merchant and artisan classes, and the spread of Renaissance humanism. These changes brought about both opportunities and challenges. The city was a hub of trade and commerce, benefiting from its position at the crossroads of important trade routes. Its markets were bustling with goods from across Europe and beyond, contributing to a flourishing economy. Yet, beneath this veneer of prosperity, there were underlying issues that created a fertile ground for social unrest and psychological stress. The period leading up to the Dancing Plague was marred by a series of misfortunes. Poor harvests had led to food shortages, driving up the cost of living and exacerbating the struggles of the lower classes. Diseases such as smallpox and syphilis were rampant, adding to the misery of the population. Additionally, the constant threat of war and political instability loomed large, as rival factions within the Holy Roman Empire vied for power. Religiously, Strasbourg was a city on the cusp of transformation. The early 16th century saw the beginnings of the Protestant Reformation, spearheaded by figures like Martin Luther. Strasbourg became a center for reformist ideas, attracting thinkers and preachers who challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. This religious ferment led to a polarization of the population, with intense debates and sometimes violent confrontations between supporters of the old faith and the new doctrines. The tension between these groups created a charged atmosphere where fear and uncertainty were pervasive. Amidst these broader social and political dynamics, the daily life of the average Strasbourger was fraught with hardship. The lower classes, in particular, faced a grim reality. Many lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions, with limited access to clean water and nutritious food. The pressures of survival in such an environment were immense, and the psychological toll was significant. Superstitions and fears of divine retribution were common, as people sought to make sense of their suffering and find solace in their beliefs. The city's governance structure also played a role in shaping the response to crises. Strasbourg was a free imperial city, meaning it had a degree of autonomy within the Holy Roman Empire. It was governed by a council of wealthy merchants and patricians, whose decisions were often influenced by their own economic interests. This elite ruling class was not always attuned to the needs and grievances of the poorer citizens, leading to a disconnect between the authorities and the general populace. In this context, the outbreak of the Dancing Plague can be seen as a symptom of the broader societal stresses. The city's collective psyche was strained to the breaking point, and the sudden, inexplicable eruption of uncontrollable dancing was a manifestation of this underlying tension. The historical context of Strasbourg in 1518 thus provides crucial insights into why the Dancing Plague occurred and how it unfolded with such intensity. The city's economic prosperity juxtaposed with widespread poverty, its religious fervor mixed with deep-seated fears, and its political autonomy combined with social inequities, all contributed to creating an environment where an event like the Dancing Plague could take root and spread. Understanding this backdrop allows us to appreciate the complexity of the factors at play and the myriad ways in which they interacted to produce one of history's most puzzling phenomena. Chapter 2. The Outbreak, the First Dancers. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg began like any other, with the city's inhabitants going about their daily routines, unaware of the strange and tragic events that were about to unfold. The first signs of what would become known as the Dancing Plague appeared in mid-July, when a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the streets and began to dance. Her movements were not those of joy or celebration, but rather seemed to be driven by an uncontrollable urge, as if she were possessed by some unseen force. Frau Trophia's dance continued unabated for hours, and she quickly drew a crowd of onlookers. Her husband, neighbors, and passers-by watched in bewilderment and concern as she twirled, leaped, and gyrated, unable to stop despite her evident exhaustion. Attempts to intervene and restrain her were futile. She seemed impervious to reason or physical restraint. Her dance, which began as a solitary spectacle, soon became a catalyst for a much larger and more disturbing phenomenon. Within days, others began to join Frau Trophia. Men, women, and even children were swept up in the frenzy, their bodies succumbing to the same relentless compulsion to dance. The number of dancers grew rapidly, and what started as an isolated incident turned into a full-blown epidemic. The streets of Strasbourg became a scene of chaos and despair, with dozens of people dancing uncontrollably, some for days on end, without rest or respite. Eyewitness accounts from the time provide harrowing descriptions of the dancers' plight. Many were seen writhing in pain, their faces contorted with anguish and fatigue. Their feet, bruised and bloodied from constant motion, showed the physical toll of their ordeal. Despite their obvious suffering, they could not stop, driven by a force beyond their control. The relentless nature of the dancing led to severe physical consequences, including heart attacks, strokes, and in some cases, death from sheer exhaustion. The local authorities and physicians were at a loss to explain the cause of this strange affliction. Initial reactions varied, with some viewing the dancers as victims of a supernatural curse, while others believed they were suffering from a medical condition. Theories ranged from demonic possession and divine punishment to the influence of astrological phenomena. Some suggested that the dancers were experiencing a form of hysteria or madness brought on by the stresses of daily life. As the number of dancers continued to grow, the authorities took measures to try to contain the outbreak. They hired musicians and constructed stages, hoping that organized dancing would help the afflicted to dance out their compulsion. This approach was based on the belief that the dancers needed to purge themselves of the dancing mania by continuing to dance until the urge subsided. Unfortunately, this strategy backfired, as the music and organized dancing seemed only to attract more participants and escalate the crisis. The plight of the dancers drew the attention of the city's clergy, who interpreted the phenomenon as a sign of divine wrath. Religious processions and masses were organized to pray for the city's deliverance from this curse. Relics of saints, particularly those associated with healing and protection against plagues, were paraded through the streets in the hope of invoking divine intervention. Despite these efforts, the dancing continued, showing no signs of abating. One of the most perplexing aspects of the dancing plague was its contagious nature. The sight of the dancers seemed to trigger a compulsion in others to join in, suggesting a psychological or social component to the epidemic. This aspect of the phenomenon led to various theories about the power of suggestion and the influence of collective behavior. Some historians and psychologists have likened the dancing plague to other instances of mass hysteria, where individuals in a highly stressful environment exhibit similar physical symptoms and behaviors. As the epidemic wore on, the city's resources were stretched thin. The sheer number of afflicted individuals overwhelmed local facilities, and the death toll mounted. The streets, once bustling with commerce and daily life, were now scenes of grim spectacle and suffering. The impact on the community was profound, leaving scars both physical and psychological that would endure long after the dancing had ceased. In exploring the outbreak and the first dancers, we gain a glimpse into the human side of the dancing plague. The individuals who found themselves caught up in this inexplicable compulsion were ordinary people, mothers, fathers, children, whose lives were suddenly upended by an uncontrollable force. Their stories, though often lost in the broader historical narrative, remind us of the personal tragedies that underlie such events. By understanding the experiences of these first dancers, we can better appreciate the broader social and psychological dynamics at play and begin to unravel the mystery of the dancing plague. Chapter 3. The Spread, Contagion in the Streets. As the days turned into weeks, the dancing plague of 1518 spread with alarming speed through the streets of Strasbourg. What began with a single dancer soon engulfed hundreds of individuals, creating a scene of widespread chaos and confusion. The phenomenon of mass dancing, which defied logical explanation, continued to baffle contemporary observers and modern scholars alike. The initial outbreak centered around Frau Trophia quickly gained momentum as more and more people succumbed to the urge to dance. The dancers, seemingly unable to stop, drew attention from curious onlookers and concerned citizens. The spectacle of people dancing uncontrollably in the streets created an atmosphere of both fear and fascination. The public nature of the dancing, combined with the high visibility of the dancers' suffering, contributed to a heightened sense of urgency and panic among the population. One of the most striking aspects of the dancing plague was its apparent contagiousness. People who witnessed the dancers often found themselves inexplicably compelled to join in, suggesting a powerful psychological or social influence at work. The concept of social contagion, where behaviors and emotions spread rapidly through a population, offers a potential explanation for this phenomenon. In an environment already rife with stress and anxiety, the sight of others succumbing to the dance may have triggered a similar response in susceptible individuals. The conditions in Strasbourg at the time created a perfect storm for the spread of the dancing mania. The city was experiencing a series of crises, including economic hardship, food shortages, and the threat of disease. These stressors would have heightened the overall level of anxiety and fear among the population. In such a charged atmosphere, the outbreak of the dancing plague acted as a catalyst, amplifying existing tensions and triggering a collective response. Historical records suggest that the dancing often occurred in clusters, with groups of people dancing together in specific areas of the city. This pattern of clustering supports the idea of social contagion, as individuals were more likely to join in when they saw others already dancing. The communal nature of medieval European society, with its close-knit neighborhoods and public spaces, facilitated the rapid spread of behaviors through direct observation and interaction. The role of suggestion and imitation cannot be underestimated in the context of the dancing plague. The sight of others dancing, especially in a frenzied and uncontrolled manner, likely had a profound psychological impact on onlookers. The phenomenon of emotional contagion, where people subconsciously mimic the emotions and behaviors of those around them, may have played a significant role. The fear and distress evident in the dancers could have resonated with onlookers, triggering a similar response and leading them to join in the dance. The actions of local authorities and the clergy, although well-intentioned, may have inadvertently contributed to the spread of the plague. By organizing public dances and hiring musicians, they provided a platform for the dancing to continue and attract more participants. These measures, intended to help the afflicted dance out their compulsion, instead reinforced the behavior and made it more visible. The presence of musicians and the sound of music could have acted as additional triggers, drawing more people into the dance. Medical theories of the time, while varied, also influenced the response to the epidemic. Some physicians believed that the dancing was caused by an imbalance of bodily humors or a reaction to overheated blood. Treatments based on these theories included bloodletting and the application of cooling herbs, which were largely ineffective. The lack of a clear medical understanding of the phenomenon left the population grasping for explanations and remedies, further fueling the sense of confusion and desperation. Religious interpretations of the dancing plague added another layer of complexity. The clergy often viewed the dancers as sinners being punished by divine forces or as individuals possessed by demons. Exorcisms and prayers were common responses aimed at driving out the evil spirits believed to be causing the dancing. These religious rituals, while providing some measure of comfort to the afflicted and their families, did little to stop the spread of the mania. The spread of the dancing plague also had significant social and economic repercussions. The city's daily life was disrupted, with markets and businesses affected by the presence of the dancers and the general atmosphere of disorder. Families were torn apart as members succumbed to the dancing, and the strain on community resources was immense. The economic impact was felt particularly by the lower classes, who were already struggling to survive in difficult conditions. In examining the spread of the dancing plague, it becomes clear that a complex interplay of psychological, social, and environmental factors was at work. The phenomenon of mass dancing was not simply a case of individual madness, but rather a collective response to a range of stressors and influences. The rapid and extensive spread of the dancing mania highlights the vulnerability of human populations to psychological contagion, especially in times of crisis. By understanding the mechanisms of this contagion, we can gain insights into the nature of mass psychogenic illness and the ways in which social and environmental factors can influence human behavior. The dancing plague of 1518 serves as a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of mind, body, and society, and the profound impact that collective experiences can have on individuals and communities. Chapter 4. The Symptoms, Dance or Disease. As the dancing plague of 1518 spread through Strasbourg, the symptoms exhibited by the afflicted became a focal point for observers and historians alike. The behaviors and physical manifestations associated with the dance were as varied as they were disturbing. To understand the full scope of this phenomenon, it is crucial to delve into the specific symptoms experienced by the dancers and explore how these symptoms were perceived and interpreted by contemporaries. The most obvious symptom of the dancing plague was the uncontrollable compulsion to dance. This was not a leisurely or joyful dance, but a frantic, often violent, series of movements. The dancers leaped, twirled, and convulsed with a sense of urgency and distress. Eyewitnesses described their movements as erratic and frenzied, lacking coordination or rhythm. The dancers appeared to be in a trance-like state, oblivious to their surroundings and impervious to attempts to stop them. Physical exhaustion was a common consequence of prolonged dancing. Many dancers continued for hours or even days without rest, leading to severe fatigue and collapse. The physical toll was evident in their bruised and bloodied feet, which bore the brunt of the relentless motion. Reports from the time indicate that some dancers died from heart attacks, strokes, or other complications related to extreme physical exertion. The sight of dancers collapsing in the streets added to the overall atmosphere of fear and confusion. Another notable symptom was the expression of pain and distress on the faces of the dancers. Contemporary accounts frequently mention the anguished looks and cries of those caught up in the mania. This aspect of the dancing plague distinguished it from other forms of communal dancing or ecstatic religious experiences, where participants typically displayed joy or spiritual ecstasy. The dancers' expressions suggested a profound internal struggle, as if they were battling an invisible tormentor. In addition to the physical symptoms, many dancers exhibited signs of altered mental states. They appeared to be in a trance or possessed, with vacant stares and an inability to communicate coherently. Some historians have suggested that these behaviors might be indicative of a dissociative state, where individuals lose touch with reality and experience a form of psychological detachment. The trance-like condition of the dancers contributed to the perception that they were under the influence of supernatural forces. Contemporary explanations for the symptoms of the dancing plague varied widely. Medical theories of the time were heavily influenced by the humoral theory of medicine, which posited that health was governed by the balance of bodily fluids, or humors. According to this view, the dancing mania could be attributed to an imbalance of these humors, particularly an excess of choler or bile, which was thought to cause agitation and restlessness. Treatments based on this theory included bloodletting and the application of cooling herbs to restore balance. Religious interpretations of the symptoms were also prevalent. Many clergy believed that the dancers were being punished for their sins or were possessed by demons. This belief led to a range of religious responses, including exorcisms, prayers, and processions with holy relics. The religious framing of the symptoms as a manifestation of divine or demonic influence reinforced the sense of fear and helplessness among the population. The sight of dancers writhing in pain and exhibiting signs of possession resonated deeply with contemporary religious beliefs and superstitions. In addition to medical and religious explanations, there were social and psychological interpretations of the symptoms. Some scholars have argued that the dancing mania was a form of mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness, where psychological stressors manifest as physical symptoms. The intense social and economic pressures faced by the people of Strasbourg, combined with existing fears and anxieties, could have triggered a collective psychological response. The symptoms of the dancing plague, seen through this lens, were a physical expression of underlying psychological distress. The role of ergotism, a condition caused by consuming rye contaminated with ergot fungus, has also been considered. Ergotism can produce symptoms such as hallucinations, muscle spasms, and convulsions, which bear a resemblance to the behaviors observed during the dancing plague. However, this theory is not without its critics, as the widespread nature of the dancing mania and its specific social context suggest that psychological and cultural factors played a significant role. The diversity of symptoms and the various interpretations highlight the complexity of the dancing plague. It was not simply a physical ailment, but a multifaceted phenomenon that encompassed medical, psychological, and cultural dimensions. The behaviors exhibited by the dancers were shaped by a combination of individual and collective factors, reflecting the intricate interplay between mind, body, and society. Understanding the symptoms of the dancing plague provides valuable insights into the broader context of the epidemic. It reveals the ways in which physical and psychological distress can manifest in response to social and environmental stressors. The vivid descriptions of the dancers' agony and the varied attempts to explain and treat their condition are the challenges faced by contemporary observers in grappling with this mysterious affliction. By examining the symptoms in detail, we can appreciate the human dimension of the dancing plague. The individuals caught up in the mania were not just historical curiosities, but real people experiencing profound suffering. Their stories offer a poignant reminder of the vulnerability of the human body and mind to the forces of stress and fear, and the ways in which these forces can manifest in extreme and inexplicable behaviors. Chapter 5. Theories and Explanations. Medical Perspectives. The dancing plague of 1518, with its bewildering symptoms and rapid spread, prompted a range of medical theories and explanations from contemporary physicians and scholars. This chapter delves into the various medical perspectives on the phenomenon, exploring how doctors of the time attempted to understand and treat the epidemic, and how modern interpretations have built on and challenged these early theories. In the early 16th century, medical knowledge was still heavily influenced by ancient and medieval theories, particularly those of Hippocrates and Galen. The dominant framework was the humoral theory of medicine, which posited that health was maintained by the balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was believed to result from an imbalance of these humors. Within this context, many physicians interpreted the dancing plague as a manifestation of such an imbalance. One prevalent theory was that the dancers suffered from an excess of choler, or yellow bile, which was associated with heat and dryness. This condition was thought to cause agitation and restlessness, leading to the uncontrollable movements observed in the afflicted. Treatments aimed at reducing choler included bloodletting, purging, and the application of cooling herbs and poultices. These methods, while consistent with humoral theory, were largely ineffective in alleviating the dancer's symptoms. Another theory suggested that the dancing plague was a form of hot blood disease, where the blood became overheated and caused the body to move uncontrollably. This idea was linked to the concept of dancing mania or choreomania, a term derived from the Greek word chorea, meaning dance. Physicians who subscribed to this view recommended treatments that would cool the blood, such as cold baths and the consumption of cooling foods and drinks. Despite these efforts, the epidemic continued unabated, highlighting the limitations of contemporary medical practices. In addition to humoral explanations, some physicians considered the possibility of poisoning or environmental factors. Ergotism, caused by the ingestion of rye contaminated with ergot fungus, was one such hypothesis. Ergot contains alkaloids that can induce hallucinations, muscle spasms, and convulsions, symptoms that bear a resemblance to those of the dancing plague. However, ergotism typically affects individuals sporadically rather than causing widespread, synchronized outbreaks, casting doubt on this theory as the sole explanation. Modern interpretations of the dancing plague have introduced new perspectives and interdisciplinary approaches. One significant area of study is the concept of mass psychogenic illness, MPI, also known as mass hysteria. MPI occurs when psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms in a group of people, often triggered by a shared stressor or environmental condition. The social and economic hardships faced by the people of Strasbourg, including famine, disease, and religious turmoil, created a fertile ground for such a phenomenon. The rapid spread of the dancing mania can be understood as a collective response to these intense pressures. Psychologists and sociologists have explored how social contagion and the power of suggestion might have contributed to the spread of the dancing plague. The sight of others dancing uncontrollably, combined with existing fears and anxieties, could have triggered a similar response in susceptible individuals. The communal nature of medieval European society, with its emphasis on public rituals and collective experiences, would have amplified this effect. The phenomenon of emotional contagion, where individuals unconsciously mimic the behaviors and emotions of those around them, offers a plausible explanation for the rapid proliferation of dancers. Another modern theory considers the role of neurological and psychiatric conditions. Conditions such as epilepsy, Tourette syndrome, and certain movement disorders can cause involuntary movements and behaviors that resemble the symptoms of the dancing plague. While these conditions typically do not spread contagiously, the stress and trauma experienced by the population could have exacerbated underlying neurological vulnerabilities, leading to a higher incidence of such behaviors. The interdisciplinary nature of modern research on the dancing plague highlights the complexity of the phenomenon. No single explanation fully accounts for all aspects of the epidemic, suggesting that it was likely the result of multiple interacting factors. The combination of psychological, social, environmental, and possibly neurological influences created a unique set of conditions that gave rise to the mass dancing. Chapter 6. The Theories and Explanations, Religious and Cultural Perspectives. In the early 16th century, religion played a central role in the lives of the people of Strasbourg. The city was deeply influenced by Christian doctrine, and religious interpretations of unusual events were common. The dancing plague was no exception. Many clergy and laypeople viewed the epidemic as a manifestation of divine wrath or demonic possession, reflecting broader themes of sin, punishment, and spiritual warfare. One prevalent religious interpretation was that the dancers were being punished by God for their sins. This view was rooted in the medieval Christian belief in divine retribution, where misfortunes and illnesses were seen as consequences of moral failings. The sight of people dancing uncontrollably and suffering visibly was interpreted as a sign that they had incurred God's displeasure. This belief led to various religious responses, including public penance, prayers, and processions aimed at appeasing divine anger and seeking forgiveness. Another common belief was that the dancers were possessed by demons or evil spirits. This interpretation was influenced by the medieval Christian worldview, which held that demonic forces were actively involved in human affairs. The erratic and frenzied movements of the dancers, along with their apparent lack of control and awareness, were seen as evidence of possession. Exorcisms and other rituals designed to expel demons were performed in an attempt to cure the afflicted. These practices reflected a broader cultural emphasis on the power of spiritual warfare and the need to combat evil through religious means. The role of saints and religious relics in addressing the dancing plague also highlights the intersection of religion and culture. In Strasbourg, Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, epileptics, and those afflicted with nervous disorders, was particularly venerated. Pilgrimages to shrines dedicated to Saint Vitus and the use of his relics were common responses to the dancing mania. The belief in the intercessory power of saints and the efficacy of relics in healing played a significant role in shaping the religious response to the epidemic. Cultural practices and beliefs surrounding dance also influenced interpretations of the dancing plague. In medieval Europe, dance was not only a form of entertainment, but also a significant part of religious and communal life. Ritual dances, processions, and festivals were common, and dance was often associated with spiritual and social cohesion. The subversion of dance from a controlled and communal activity to a chaotic and compulsive behavior would have been particularly alarming, reinforcing the sense that the dancers were under the influence of supernatural forces. Folklore and superstition further shaped the cultural understanding of the dancing plague. Stories and legends of dancing curses and enchanted dances were part of the medieval imagination. These tales often involved individuals or groups being cursed to dance as a result of offending a supernatural being or failing to observe religious customs. Such folklore provided a familiar framework for interpreting the strange events unfolding in Strasbourg, lending credence to the idea that the dancers were victims of a curse or enchantment. Modern interpretations of the dancing plague have continued to explore these religious and cultural dimensions. Anthropologists and historians have examined how communal rituals and beliefs about the supernatural shaped the collective experience of the epidemic. The concept of ritualized behavior has been used to understand how the dancing mania functioned as a form of communal expression and coping mechanism in response to extreme stress and anxiety. Chapter 7. The Response, Authority and Intervention. As the dancing plague of 1518 spread through the streets of Strasbourg, local authorities and community leaders faced the daunting challenge of containing the epidemic and restoring order to the city. The initial response to the dancing plague was one of confusion and disbelief. The sudden onset of the epidemic, coupled with the bizarre and inexplicable nature of the symptoms, left authorities scrambling for answers. Local officials, including magistrates and members of the city council, were ill-equipped to deal with such a phenomenon and struggled to formulate a coherent strategy. One of the first measures taken by the authorities was to investigate the cause of the epidemic. Physicians and medical experts were consulted, and theories ranging from demonic possession to natural phenomena were considered. However, the lack of a clear understanding of the underlying causes hindered efforts to develop effective treatments or preventive measures. As the epidemic continued to escalate, the authorities became increasingly desperate to contain the spread of the dancing plague. Quarantine measures were implemented in an attempt to isolate the afflicted and prevent further contagion. Infected individuals were confined to their homes or removed to makeshift hospitals, where they could be monitored and treated away from the general population. These measures, while well-intentioned, proved ineffective in stemming the tide of the epidemic. The hiring of musicians and construction of stages in public squares were among the most controversial interventions employed by the authorities. The idea behind these measures was to provide an outlet for the dancers to express their compulsion in a controlled environment, thereby allowing them to dance out their affliction. However, far from alleviating the problem, these actions only served to exacerbate it, as the presence of music and the spectacle of organized dancing attracted even more participants to join in the frenzy. Religious leaders also played a prominent role in responding to the dancing plague. Clergy from various denominations organized processions, masses, and prayers in an attempt to invoke divine intervention and deliverance from the epidemic. Relics of saints were paraded through the streets, and pilgrimages to holy sites were encouraged as a means of seeking protection and healing. These religious rituals provided solace to the afflicted and their families, but did little to halt the spread of the plague. The response of the broader community to the dancing plague was mixed. Some individuals responded with compassion and solidarity, offering assistance to the afflicted and their families. Others, however, reacted with fear and suspicion, shunning the dancers and ostracizing them from society. The stigma associated with the plague further compounded the suffering of those affected, driving them into isolation and despair. Despite the efforts of authorities and community members, the dancing plague continued unabated for several weeks, exacting a heavy toll on the city of Strasbourg. The death toll mounted, and the streets became littered with the bodies of the afflicted. The economic and social fabric of the city was torn apart, with businesses closing their doors and families torn apart by the epidemic. In hindsight, it is clear that the response to the dancing plague was largely ineffective in containing the epidemic or providing relief to those affected. The lack of understanding of the underlying causes, combined with the limited medical and scientific knowledge of the time, hampered efforts to develop appropriate interventions. The reliance on religious rituals and superstition, while comforting to some, failed to address the root causes of the epidemic or offer practical solutions for mitigation. Chapter 8. Interpretations and Speculations. Unraveling the Mystery. One of the most enduring medical theories about the dancing plague revolves around the possibility of mass psychogenic illness, MPI, also known as mass hysteria or collective hysteria. According to this view, the intense social and environmental stressors faced by the people of Strasbourg triggered a collective psychological response, leading to the widespread manifestation of physical symptoms such as dancing. The power of suggestion and social contagion played a significant role in perpetuating the epidemic, as individuals were influenced by the behavior of those around them. While MPI offers a compelling explanation for the rapid spread of the dancing plague, it does not fully account for all aspects of the phenomenon, leaving unanswered questions about its underlying causes. Another medical theory posits that the dancing plague may have been caused by ergot poisoning, a condition resulting from the ingestion of rye contaminated with ergot fungus. Ergotism can produce symptoms such as hallucinations, convulsions, and muscle spasms, which bear a resemblance to those observed during the epidemic. The theory suggests that the people of Strasbourg may have consumed bread or other foodstuffs contaminated with ergot, leading to widespread neurological and physiological effects. While ergot poisoning offers a plausible explanation for some aspects of the dancing plague, such as the convulsive movements and altered mental states exhibited by the dancers, it does not fully account for the collective nature of the phenomenon or the rapid spread of the epidemic. Chapter 9. Modern Perspectives and Research. One area of contemporary research focuses on epidemiology and infectious disease dynamics. While the dancing plague is not caused by a conventional infectious agent, researchers have drawn parallels between its spread and the transmission patterns of infectious diseases. Mathematical modeling and computer simulations have been used to explore how social networks, population dynamics, and environmental factors may have contributed to the rapid dissemination of the epidemic. By applying insights from infectious disease research to the study of the dancing plague, scientists hope to gain a deeper understanding of the mechanisms underlying mass psychogenic illness and other collective phenomena. Psychological perspectives on the dancing plague have also evolved in recent years, with a growing emphasis on the role of social and cognitive factors in shaping individual and group behavior. Research in social psychology has explored how conformity, obedience, and social identity influence the propensity to engage in collective actions, such as the dancing observed during the epidemic. Experimental studies have demonstrated the power of social influence and the tendency to conform to group norms, even in the absence of clear rational motives. By examining the psychological mechanisms underlying collective behavior, psychologists aim to elucidate the dynamics of mass psychogenic illness and inform strategies for prevention and intervention. Anthropological approaches to the dancing plague have highlighted the cultural and symbolic dimensions of the phenomenon, emphasizing its significance within the broader social context of medieval Europe. Ethnographic studies have explored how dance and ritual were intertwined with religious beliefs, social hierarchies, and communal identity in the medieval period. By examining the cultural meanings and practices surrounding dance in historical and contemporary societies, anthropologists seek to unravel the symbolic significance of the dancing plague and its implications for our understanding of human culture and society.